title Faceless Figure. In the quaint town of Evergreen, there stood a house with a reputation. To the casual observer, it was an ordinary Victorian home, charming and timeless. Yet those who ventured inside knew of its peculiar secret, a secret that began to unravel when the Collins family moved in. The Collins family, eager for a fresh start, had purchased the house at a surprisingly low price. It was a dream come true, especially for Sarah Collins, an avid photographer with a keen eye for capturing the beauty of the mundane. She spent hours exploring the house with her camera, documenting every intricate detail. The ornate moldings, the antique furniture, and the sweeping staircase all became subjects of her lens. One evening, as Sarah reviewed the day's photographs, she noticed something peculiar. In one of the images, taken in the living room, there was an odd blur in the background. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light or a flaw in the lens. However, the blur seemed to have a form and almost human shape, but devoid of any facial features. Curiosity piqued, Sarah took more photos around the house over the following days. To her growing unease, the faceless figure appeared in every set. It stood in the shadows of the hallway, lingered by the fireplace, and even appeared faintly in reflections. Always present, yet always faceless. Sarah's husband, Tom, was skeptical when she showed him the photographs. He suggested logical explanations, lens flare, reflections, or even dust particles. But Sarah knew these explanations didn't fit. Determined to uncover the truth, she started to delve into the history of the house. The local library became her second home as she sifted through old newspapers and property records. She discovered that the house had a long and varied history, changing hands many times over the years. Among the various owners, one name stood out: Margaret Holloway, a reclusive woman who lived there in the early 1900s. Margaret was known for her eccentricities and her intense interest in spiritualism. According to the records, Margaret had conducted numerous séances in the house, attempting to contact the spirit of her deceased husband. She was found dead in the living room under mysterious circumstances, her face covered by a veil. The house was sold shortly after her death, and rumors of strange occurrences began to surface. With this new information, Sarah's anxiety grew. She became obsessed with photographing the house, trying to capture the faceless figure more clearly. The more she photographed, the more defined the figure became, yet its face remained an empty void. The atmosphere in the house began to change. At night, Sarah heard faint whispers, almost inaudible, but just enough to disturb her sleep. She felt an unseen presence watching her, and shadows seemed to move of their own accord. Tom, initially dismissive, started to notice the unsettling ambience too. The once warm and inviting home now felt cold and oppressive. One afternoon, Sarah decided to set up cameras in various rooms, hoping to capture more evidence. As she reviewed the footage, she noticed a pattern. The faceless figure always appeared in the same locations where Margaret Holloway had held her séances. It seemed to be tethered to these spots, bound by some unseen force. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, Sarah reached out to a local historian who specialized in the supernatural. The historian, a somber man named Victor, agreed to visit the house. He brought with him old maps, photographs, and a wealth of knowledge about the town's haunted history. As Victor examined the photographs, his expression grew grim. He explained that the faceless figure was likely a spirit trapped between worlds, unable to move on due to unfinished business or a traumatic death. Margaret Holloway's intense spiritual practices could have inadvertently bound the spirit to the house. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as Victor described the possibility of a restless entity lingering in their home. He advised caution, suggesting that disturbing the spirit further could have dire consequences. But Sarah was determined to understand the figure's origin and, if possible, help it find peace. The nights grew longer and more oppressive. The faceless figure appeared more frequently in the photographs, and its presence felt stronger, more tangible. Sarah's dreams were plagued by visions of the figure, always watching, always waiting. In a final attempt to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to conduct her own séance, hoping to communicate with the spirit directly. Despite Victor's warnings, she felt this was the only way to resolve the mystery and restore peace to their home. As she prepared for the séance, the house seemed to react. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. The faceless figure, once a mere blur, now stood more clearly in the corners of her vision. The stage was set for a confrontation between the living and the spectral, a clash that would reveal the dark secrets of the house and the tragic story of its faceless inhabitant. As the night of the séance approached, Sarah's nerves were on edge. The house seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and every creak and groan of the old structure felt like a warning. She set up the parlor as best as she could, drawing upon her research and the instructions Victor had provided. Candles flickered on the antique table, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. A sense of unease settled over her as she arranged the items: a planchette, an old photograph of Margaret Holloway, and a lock of hair she had found in an old chest in the attic. Tom watched her preparations with growing concern. Though he had been skeptical, the changes in the house and Sarah's growing obsession had shaken his confidence. The cold spots, the whispers, the constant feeling of being watched, all of it had taken a toll. He had tried to dissuade Sarah from holding the séance, but her determination was unwavering. As midnight approached, Sarah sat at the table, her hands resting lightly on the planchette. Tom, though hesitant, joined her, his presence a silent support. They closed their eyes and began to concentrate, focusing on Margaret Holloway and the faceless figure that haunted their home. The air in the room grew colder, and the candles flickered wildly. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she called out to the spirit, her voice steady but laced with fear. "Margaret Holloway, we seek to understand your pain. We wish to help you find peace. Please, if you are here, give us a sign." For a moment there was only silence. Then, the planchette began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed it spelled out words on the board. Tom's eyes widened in disbelief, but he kept his hands steady, following Sarah's lead. The words spelled out a message trapped: faceless, help. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She pressed on, her voice trembling. "Margaret, what keeps you here? How can we help you find peace?" The planchette moved again, spelling out another message: veil, lost, return. Confusion and fear mingled in Sarah's mind. She glanced at Tom, who looked equally bewildered. Veil. What veil? She asked aloud, hoping for more clarity. The candles flickered violently, and a cold breeze swept through the room. The planchette moved more forcefully now, spelling out a final message in Attic: veil, return. Sarah's mind raced. The attic, where she had found the lock of hair and other personal items belonging to Margaret. It had to be connected. She stood abruptly, pulling Tom with her. "We need to go to the attic," she said, urgency in her voice. Together they ascended the creaking stairs, the house seeming to groan in protest. The attic was dark and cluttered, filled with decades of forgotten belongings. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing old trunks, discarded furniture, and boxes covered in dust. They found the chest where Sarah had discovered Margaret's belongings. With trembling hands, she opened it again, searching for any sign of the veil mentioned in the séance. Amidst the old clothes and trinkets, she finally found it: an old, tattered veil, yellowed with age. As she held it up, a sense of dread washed over her. The veil seemed to pulse with a cold energy, almost as if it were alive. Tom looked at it with a mixture of awe and fear. "Is this what she meant?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It must be. We need to return it, somehow." With the veil in hand, they returned to the parlor. The candles had burned low, casting the room in an eerie glow. Sarah placed the veil on the table and called out to Margaret once more. "We found the veil. What do we do now?" The planchette moved again, this time with a sense of finality burn. "Release." Sarah hesitated. Burning the veil felt drastic, but if it was the only way to release the spirit, she was willing to try. Tom fetched a metal bowl and some matches. Together they placed the veil in the bowl and set it alight. The veil burned quickly, the flames consuming it with a fierce intensity. As the last remnants turned to ash, a sudden, oppressive silence filled the room. The temperature began to rise, and the oppressive feeling lifted. For a moment they both sat in stunned silence, waiting for something to happen. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. Sarah glanced at Tom, who gave her a tentative smile. "Do you think it worked?" he asked. Before Sarah could answer, a soft, almost inaudible whisper filled the room. It was a woman's voice, gentle and filled with gratitude. "Thank you." The faceless figure no longer appeared in their photographs, and the oppressive presence in the house seemed to dissipate. Though they had released the spirit of Margaret Holloway, Sarah knew that the house held many more secrets yet to be uncovered. But for now, they had found a measure of peace, and the faceless figure was no longer a part of their lives. Yet, in the deepest corners of the house, in the shadows that lingered just beyond the reach of the light, a sense of unease remained, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their journey with the supernatural was far from over. Despite the initial sense of relief following the séance, the house's atmosphere slowly began to shift again. The oppressive heaviness that had seemed to lift now returned, even more menacing. Sarah's nights were restless, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and haunting whispers. Tom also sensed the change, the once comforting walls of their home now feeling like they were closing in on them. One particularly stormy night, Sarah decided to delve deeper into the chest where she had found Margaret's veil. She hoped to find more clues about the house's dark history and the mysterious faceless figure. As lightning flashed outside, illuminating the attic with brief, stark light, she carefully examined each item in the chest. Among the old letters, photographs, and trinkets, she found a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the ink was faded, but still legible. The journal belonged to Margaret Holloway, detailing her life in the house and her spiritual practices. As Sarah read through the entries, a chilling story began to unfold. Margaret had been deeply devoted to her husband, who had died tragically in an accident. Her grief led her to seek solace in the occult, believing she could contact his spirit. The journal chronicled her numerous attempts at séances, rituals, and other spiritual practices. It also revealed her growing obsession with a particular spirit, a faceless entity that appeared during her sessions. Margaret described the spirit as a harbinger, an entity trapped between worlds, neither living nor dead. She believed the spirit was the key to contacting her husband, and she became increasingly desperate in her attempts to bind it to the house. Her final entries were frantic, filled with fear and despair. She wrote of the spirit becoming more powerful, more present, and her realization that she had made a grave mistake. One entry stood out, dated just days before her death. The faceless figure grows stronger. "It is not my husband's spirit, but something else entirely. I fear I have unleashed a darkness I cannot contain. If anyone finds this, know that the veil binds it. Destroy the veil, and it may be set free." Sarah's heart raced as she read the words. They had burned the veil, yet the darkness remained. She realized that Margaret's attempts to bind the spirit had only angered it, trapping it within the house. The spirit was now free from its tether, but it was not at peace. It was vengeful, seeking retribution for its imprisonment. Determined to find a way to finally rid the house of the spirit, Sarah reached out to Victor once more. She shared her findings with him, and he agreed to return to the house, this time bringing a team of paranormal investigators. They arrived equipped with cameras, audio recorders, and various tools designed to detect and communicate with spirits. The investigators set up their equipment throughout the house, focusing on the areas where the faceless figure had appeared most frequently. As they began their investigation, the house responded almost immediately. Bold spots formed in the rooms, and the whispers grew louder. Shadows moved of their own accord, and the oppressive feeling intensified. Victor and his team conducted a series of EVP, electronic voice phenomenon sessions, asking the spirit to communicate through the audio recorders. They received chilling responses, distorted voices, cries for help, and angry growls. The faceless figure was not just a passive presence, it was actively malevolent. As the night wore on, the investigators uncovered more about the spirit's origin. Through their equipment, they detected a second presence in the house, a weaker, more subdued spirit. This spirit, they theorized, could be Margaret Holloway herself, trapped by her own mistakes and overshadowed by the more powerful entity she had summoned. The team decided to perform a ritual to cleanse the house, hoping to release both spirits. They prepared the parlor once more, setting up protective circles and lighting candles infused with cleansing herbs. Sarah and Tom watched anxiously as the investigators began their ritual, chanting incantations and calling upon protective forces. The air grew thick with tension and the temperature plummeted. The candles flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The faceless figure appeared again, more defined and menacing than ever. It stood at the edge of the protective circle, its void-like face seeming to bore into their souls. Victor and his team continued their chants, their voices rising above the howling wind outside. The figure lurched forward, but it was repelled by the circle's protective energy. The weaker presence, which they believed to be Margaret, began to materialize within the circle, her ghostly form barely visible. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light filled the room. The faceless figure let out a piercing scream, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Margaret's spirit, now more visible, reached out towards the light, her expression one of relief and sorrow. The light grew brighter, enveloping both spirits. The faceless figure writhed in agony, while Margaret's spirit seemed to dissolve peacefully. In an instant, both presences vanished, and the house fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene calm. Victor and his team concluded the ritual, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Sarah and Tom, though shaken, felt a profound sense of relief. The faceless figure was gone, and Margaret's spirit was finally at peace. The investigators packed up their equipment and left, leaving Sarah and Tom to reflect on the night's events. The house once again felt like a home. The shadows no longer moved on their own, and the whispers had ceased. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond stronger for it. But as they settled in for the night, a nagging thought lingered in Sarah's mind. The house had held so many secrets, and they had only uncovered a few. She wondered what other spirits might still linger, waiting to be discovered. The faceless figure was gone, but the echoes of the past remained, a reminder that some mysteries are never truly laid to rest. Despite the apparent victory over the faceless figure, a lingering unease shadowed the Collins family. The house was now devoid of the oppressive presence, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their battle with the supernatural was not entirely over. The once comforting walls of their home now seemed to hold an air of wary anticipation, as if waiting for something else to happen. Sarah's sleep was still disturbed by fragmented dreams of shadowy figures and indistinct whispers. She began to spend more time away from the house, finding solace in the mundane routines of the town. Tom, too, was more vigilant, his eyes often darting to dark corners and reflective surfaces, as if expecting to see the faceless figure reappear. One evening, while browsing through the local antique shop, Sarah came across a dusty, old photograph album. Intrigued, she bought it and brought it home, thinking it might be a welcome distraction from the tension. As she flipped through the pages, filled with sepia-toned images of the town's past, a sense of familiarity settled over her. Her breath caught when she reached a series of photographs depicting the very house they lived in, dated back to the early 1900s. Among the smiling faces of the previous residents, one image stood out, a group photo taken in the living room. There, in the background, was the unmistakable blur of the faceless figure. Sarah's hands trembled as she traced the outline of the figure with her finger. It seemed to have always been there, a silent observer throughout the house's history. She wondered how many others had encountered it and what had become of them. Determined to uncover more, she decided to visit the town's historical society, hoping to find records of the house's past occupants. At the historical society, Sarah was greeted by Mrs. Whitmore, an elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. When Sarah mentioned the house and showed her the photograph, Mrs. Whitmore's expression grew somber. "Ah, the old Holloway house," she said. "That place has seen more than its fair share of tragedy." Mrs. Whitmore led Sarah to a collection of old newspapers and records. Together, they sifted through articles detailing the lives of the house's former residents. One story after another painted a grim picture: disappearances, unexplained deaths, and families fleeing in terror. The common thread in all these tales was the presence of the faceless figure. Sarah learned that the figure had been sighted by various occupants, each describing the same eerie, featureless form. Some had tried to communicate with it, while others had attempted to banish it, much like Sarah and Tom. None had succeeded, and most had left the house in fear, their lives forever altered by their experiences. One particular article caught Sarah's eye. It detailed the life of a young girl named Emily Thompson, who had lived in the house in the 1920s. Emily had been an amateur photographer, much like Sarah, and had documented her time in the house through her lens. Her journal, found years later, described her encounters with the faceless figure in chilling detail. Emily had become obsessed with capturing the figure more clearly. Much like Sarah, her journal entries grew increasingly frantic, describing how the figure seemed to be drawn to her, appearing more frequently in her photographs. She had believed the figure was trying to communicate with her, leaving messages in the form of blurred words and shapes. The last entry in Emily's journal was the most disturbing. It detailed a night when the figure had appeared not just in her photographs, but physically in her room. Emily described the overwhelming sense of dread, the cold touch of the figure's hand, and the sound of its whispers, unintelligible yet filled with malevolence. Emily had fled the house the next day and was never seen again. Sarah's heart pounded as she read Emily's words. It was as if history was repeating itself. Determined not to meet the same fate, she returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She shared her findings with Tom, who was equally alarmed but supportive. Together, they devised a plan to uncover more about the figure's origin and find a way to put it to rest permanently. They decided to search the house for any hidden rooms or passages that might hold more clues. Starting in the basement, they meticulously examined the walls and floor for any signs of concealed spaces. After hours of searching, they discovered a loose floorboard in a corner of the basement. Beneath it was a small, hidden compartment containing a bundle of old letters and a locket. The letters were written by Margaret Holloway, but they were different from the journal entries Sarah had found earlier. These letters were addressed to a woman named Beatrice, who seemed to be a close friend or confidante. Margaret detailed her growing fear of the faceless figure, her regret for summoning it, and her desperate attempts to bind it. One letter stood out, written just days before Margaret's death. In it, she mentioned a ritual she had discovered, one that could potentially banish the spirit. The ritual involved using the locket as a focal point, along with a series of incantations and specific herbs. Margaret had been too afraid to attempt it alone, and Beatrice had never received the letter in time to help. Sarah clutched the locket tightly, feeling a mix of hope and fear. They had a chance to end this, to free the house from the figure's grasp. She and Tom gathered the necessary herbs and prepared for the ritual. As night fell, they set up the parlor once more, following the instructions in Margaret's letter. The air grew thick with tension as they began the incantations, the candles flickering with an unnatural light. The faceless figure appeared again, more menacing than ever. It hovered just outside the protective circle, its presence almost tangible. Sarah held the locket high, chanting the final words of the incantation. The figure let out a chilling wail, its form writhing in agony. The candle's flames flared, casting blinding light. As the light dimmed, the figure began to dissolve, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The room fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted once more. The locket grew warm in Sarah's hand, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The faceless figure was gone, banished at last. Exhausted but triumphant, Sarah and Tom sat in the quiet of their home, feeling a sense of closure. The house, though still holding its many secrets, was finally free of its haunting legacy. The shadows no longer moved, and the whispers were silenced. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their bond stronger for it. As they prepared for bed, Sarah placed the locket in a small box, a reminder of the battle they had fought and won. The house was now theirs, truly a home free from the shadows of the past. Yet, deep in her heart, Sarah knew that the echoes of the dark history would always remain, a silent testament to the mysteries they had unraveled and the courage they had found within themselves. The days following the banishment of the faceless figure brought a newfound peace to the Collins family. The house, now free of its oppressive aura, felt like a true home once more. Sarah and Tom began to settle back into their routine, grateful for the calm that had finally come. However, as they resumed their lives, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unresolved. The history of the house, filled with so much tragedy and mystery, lingered in her mind. The hidden compartment in the basement, the letters from Margaret, and the locket all suggested there were more secrets buried within the walls of their home. One quiet afternoon, Sarah decided to explore the attic once more. She felt drawn to it, as if it held the answers to the lingering questions in her mind. She climbed the narrow stairs and entered the dimly lit space, the smell of dust and old wood filling her senses. She moved carefully through the clutter, her eyes scanning for anything she might have missed before. In a far corner, partially hidden under a tattered sheet, she discovered an old wooden chest she hadn't noticed before. With some effort, she managed to open it, revealing a collection of ancient books and documents. As she sifted through the contents, one book in particular caught her eye. Its cover was worn and faded, with a title barely legible: The Book of Spirits. Inside, she found handwritten notes and drawings detailing various rituals and spells. Among them, she discovered a section that seemed to correspond with the ritual Margaret had described in her letters. The book detailed the process of binding and banishing spirits, but it also included information on a more permanent solution: a ritual to cleanse a place of all spiritual presence, ensuring peace for both the living and the dead. It was a complex and dangerous procedure, requiring absolute precision and unwavering focus. Sarah felt a surge of determination. This was the answer she had been searching for, the final step to ensure their home would never again be plagued by restless spirits. She brought the book to Tom, explaining her plan. Though he was hesitant, seeing the resolve in her eyes, he agreed to help. They spent the next few days gathering the necessary items for the ritual. The list was extensive: special herbs, candles, and crystals, along with personal items from those who had lived in the house. They retrieved objects from the hidden compartment in the basement, including the locket, and collected photographs and keepsakes from the attic. On the night of the ritual, the house was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Sarah and Tom prepared the parlor one final time, arranging the items according to the instructions in the book. The candles flickered, casting an eerie glow, and the scent of burning herbs filled the room. They stood within a protective circle, holding hands as Sarah began to recite the incantations. Her voice was steady, filled with conviction. The candle's flames danced wildly, and the air grew cold, but Sarah continued, unwavering. As she spoke the final words, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a soft, ethereal glow began to emanate from the items in the circle. The glow grew brighter, enveloping the room in a warm, comforting light. Shadows danced on the walls, but they were no longer menacing. Instead, they seemed to move with a sense of peace, as if saying goodbye. Sarah felt a presence beside her, gentle, reassuring. She turned to see a faint, ghostly figure, its face now clear and serene. It was Margaret Holloway, her expression one of gratitude and relief. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as Margaret's spirit slowly faded, the light growing brighter until it filled the entire room. When the light finally dimmed, the room was silent once more. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. The house felt different, truly at peace. Sarah and Tom embraced, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and closure. The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy. The house, once a place of fear and mystery, was now a sanctuary. Sarah's nightmares ceased, replaced by peaceful dreams. Tom no longer glanced nervously at shadows, and the whispers were a distant memory. Sarah continued to explore the history of their home, but now it was with a sense of curiosity rather than fear. She documented her findings, hoping to preserve the stories of those who had lived there. The faceless figure was gone, but the echoes of the past had taught her valuable lessons about courage, resilience, and the power of facing one's fears. The Collins family had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. Their home, now free of its haunting legacy, was a place of love and warmth. As they moved forward, they carried with them the memories of their journey, a testament to the strength of their bond and the enduring power of hope.